Okay. All right. So many of you did just this, or maybe you did one of the other artists. Okay. But maybe it was Monday last week, maybe it was the week before. It seems like forever ago now. But I had this, right? And this was deliberately blurred, right? So that my students would put an emphasis on what could be seen there. Basically, the instruction here was, I want an imitation of that. You know, turn it this way if you need to, turn it that way, whatever you need to do, forget it's a face, but I want you to match this. You know, don't invent anything in these places where the features are because you expect them or you know they're there. I want it to match this. And the source was, you know, fuzzing those areas and not really allowing, unless you're contriving it, unless you're coming up with it, you know, you weren't really going to be able to do that, right? And of course, what I really didn't want you to do was to what? I mean, obviously, what would be opposite of, if I'm saying match this, you know, you're in black and white, we're not working in color. But if I'm saying match this, duplicate this, I mean, well, putting something that's not there to be seen would be the opposite, right? Adding some eye stuff that you can't see, or putting little beard hairs because you know he's got a damn beard, but you know, but you can't really see that real in the, you know what I mean? You can't see little individual hairs on this, right? And this is what we need, and what we need more practice with. What I really need, actually, you know what I need more than anything? I need like a custom built tablet holder setup. You know, well, what I probably would be told I would need is a $500 camera outfit for this stuff. But right now I'm thinking that I'm starting to think, I wish I'd bought a different, not a ball joint. I shouldn't have bought the ball joint. I should have got, like, you know, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, so splat. Who drew this guy, by the way? Henry? Who else? Who drew this blurred artist? Several of you did, I know, because you sent me an image of him. It's actually a Belgian artist named Michael, I guess it would have to be Mikhail Bormans. Okay, so here we go, right? Splat. And this thing that I did in class with the charcoal and the eraser and rushed through and did in 5 or 10 minutes, and is probably full of things that aren't completely matching my blurry source. This is the information I did not have. You now have this information, right? Everybody has seen their email, and they've seen that in addition to maybe a step, on some of these people, they drew like a step greater resolution. They've seen the actual focused images there, right? Here's what you do, okay? Now, what you do is you do the same thing, okay? When I sound terse, or it seems curt, or it seems like it's a tricky exercise because the thing's blurry and it's meant to deny you something, or any of that, it's not. It's always the same thing. It's doing what you see instead of what you think, right? Because for as many times as I might not have a shape or a value, like maybe this, I don't, maybe there's something there and it's darker than I've gotten it. I see that on my source, so I'll make this a little darker. Okay, that's legit. I made one of the two criteria, what shape, what value. I made a decision based on that. So that's legit. But if I do this, I'm not being legit. Like if I look at my subject and I just am thinking, because more often than not, what we're bothered by and what we've done, all of you will find, you know, when you're working from the figure, like we did last time, did it drive you crazy if the limbs didn't seem right? You know, if it seemed like awkward, you know, people say proportions all the time. They talk about proportions. See, now I'm really sad because I can't even get rid of that. But more often than not, if I have something that I've done, there's those two things that can be right or wrong. I can have seen the shape well or not, match the shape well or not. I could have gotten it darker or lighter than it is. I have no trouble looking at this and seeing that this shirt is pretty dark. I have no trouble seeing that these areas here and what we call the hair are pretty dark, darker than they are there. It gets harder for me in here. Not only because it's like they're not as contrasty, but also because it's near the face part, and that, you know, that gets me all discombobulated, right? So I am just as apt to do something that is coming from me than not matched one of those two things. So here's what you do. Take this information. You've got it now for other artists. A lot of people drew. You can get a sticker. Who'd you draw? I promise that you know something they did. This is Maya Lin, who's best known for the Vietnam Memorial in DC. But until today, you didn't have the full resolution. You didn't have all of the stuff. It was blurry. Maybe you thought it looked goofy, you know, but you stayed the course and did it the way you were asked and resisted the desire to put something, you know what I mean? You just made it match your blurry source. That's always what you've got to do. We need more training with doing what we see rather than what we think, which is a theme from the very first day of our class, and it persists. So ideally, I think, you know, I'd like to be able to do this myself. I'd like to be able to provide myself with a blurred reference every time. Now, most of the time when I'm looking at life, I don't have a reference. I'm looking at life. But you've heard me say lots of times to squint. That's to kind of blur it a little bit, you know. So if you don't squint, I'm making it harder to see the general before the specific. I'm making it easier for me to go into little things and being able to see the forms. I mean, let's look at this right now. I cut this out with my eye, as it were. Everybody can see what I did. I've got this other hemisphere of my brain that says now he's got a blue booger on his face or something like that, because that other hemisphere of the brain does not care about shapes and values or color or forms. It does not care about forms. It cares about assigning meaning to things, symbols, all kinds of other stuff. So, you know, and I can engage with that a little bit. I can sort of observe in myself how there's a little bit of a feeling of that can't be right. That will often happen when I'm actually doing it right. Meaning I will see a shape and I will look at just that shape and I will study that shape hard and I will not bring other stuff into it. But that is so little used that the far more exercised side of the head says something rude like that. Meaning, if I am doing a very good job and looking very closely and forgetting this is an eye and not having expectations of it, just looking, pushing everything else away, because I'm thinking of that Mr. T graphic that I gave you. And sure enough, there's one of those kinds of things that the whole Mr. T is made of that you would never expect. But even if it's not perfect, that's pretty close. Like that's actually what I'm seeing there. And that other side of my head says that's not what an eyebrow looks like. That's not what an eye looks like. That must be wrong. Don't do it. This happens over and over and over in painting classes in which I observe people will look at an area like this, see a color, mix the color up on the palette, doing everything right, but then when they put it on the canvas, they'll stare at it, convinced it must be wrong. And usually it's because they don't have anything else like that in their painting yet. So that, you know, but they second guess it and they take it out. And then, you know, when they do something that, and then they're way, I mean, but then they are wrong, right? So, so here we are. What I want you to do is simply, with the more resolved references, you only need to pick a few. It doesn't have to be everything. Some of you may get caught up in it. If you, like usually if it's, I see if people are having success with something, then they want to do more of it. And they'll go and do more than I require. 3 or 4 or 5 shapes like this, shadow shapes. You see this has moved a little bit. What's really going on is my thing I was complaining about, it gradually slips. You know, my thing upstairs there, it's supposed to hold my camera, gradually slips and I have to adjust it. That ruins my day. You know, one thing like that will really do tons for your work. You don't have to get every single one. As a matter of fact, trying to get every single one right away, which is not really possible, usually leads to us doing something else. you know, going because I'm thinking about beard hair. When I shouldn't do that, I should squint and I should see if I can get any sort of shapes that are visible in this kind of stuff and do it that way first and get all the general stuff. Yeah. So let's just lock our eyes. I mean, I would probably go for that one. It's a real good one, wouldn't you say? That one cast off the nose is a really good shadow shape. If we were making a stencil, you know, we would do something like that. Notice how it's a little different this time. I trace the same thing and it's a little different. But if it's generally in the right place, you know, let me see if I can get that one on my drawing. Just locking in on that, just that, only that one. So I'm not telling you you have to add every piece of information that's in this more focused source. I don't want you to do that, actually. I want you to have the joyful experience of, if you get the topography, if you get the hills and the valleys of a face, because you can, I want you to not put in the ideas of facial features, but instead put in a couple of pieces of information about shapes that are in those places and get things that way. So I'm not going to go in and remember one of the ones I was talking about was uniform contour of the lips. You know, I can't draw this guy's mouth with an idea I have of what mouths do. I just know there's a shape here. Boy, I'm doing a terrible job. You see that shape there? Well, we call it a lip, but a few of those, just a few well observed. That's what you can do, is you can, by the way, I've seen your drawing because you sent it to me. You know, how well did you copy the blurry face? You know, I hope it frustrated you. I hope you found it frustrating to do that. I hope you had to fight with expectations of what you thought it was going to have to do because it was a face. But just take a couple of pieces of the actual shape information, the shadow shapes, right? So think about that Mr. T graphic, that shadow and light division that I'm always talking about, the two pieces of a puzzle that fit together. And rather than drawing on top of that drawing like you're painting onto a doll, add some of these, like do the same thing you were doing. Maybe they're a little darker. Maybe they're, you know, I don't know, but like put in a few pieces of shape information that are in the source that you have now that you didn't have before. But make sure you do it that way, okay? Make sure you do it that way. And then you'll basically sort of understand like how to put the specific onto something. You know, there's a lot of you did Dohosa. There's a guy who is bald in the source image. He's got glasses in that picture, you know, but like some of these, like the one of Maya Lin, have images with more resolution, but they still have a filter on them. So the shapes are more pronounced, easier to find, easier to not do that other thing, because this is all about sort of defeating your expectations and pushing aside that other that other side of the brain that says it must be this, you need to do that, you know, so on and so on and so on, which, as I repeatedly stated last week, is never asserted more than when we're doing people. Do you remember? Sure you do. You remember back however many weeks ago with graphite, a Rubens tonal study? Same idea, really. If we don't do precise edges, if we don't do all the details, if we work generally and we work at the big things that are about forms that really matter, we can break our tendency to do these other things, okay? So the best thing we can do is always just be telling ourselves what shape, what value, what shape, what value, what shape, what value. But then we can get specific assignments that, you know, make us do it. Because, I mean, so you've got some Rubens stuff, right? By the way, the last one with the cat is not really a Rubens. I was being funny. Did you guys see that? There's one of those like a Bacchus, just like this, but they put a cat. Don't do that one. Just get a laugh out of it. Otherwise, select any of these Rubens. And here's what I want you to do. And you can do it along with me. This is a not rush kind of thing. Probably the biggest way to not do what I'm asking is to rush through things. If you haven't trained your eye, you haven't really learned, you know, to just see form, and you rush, you're really, you know what I mean? Like you're really at risk if you're like hurrying through something. This is going to force you to not hurry through it. And if you embrace it, it will be restful, relaxing, and zen. If you fight it, it will be frustrating as heck. So everybody, get your three, you know, with these 3 jars and a small quantity of water in them. We are going to make our values with diluted ink. So basically, we will, if you've had value trouble, maybe this will be the thing that help you punch through. Because we're going to use a brush, and the values are sort of pre-made, right? So I've got my brush here. Well, let's see what I've got. It's probably not perfect. Things I do seldom are. But I've got 3 jars. If you put too much water in any of the jars, you'll have difficulties, because if there's a lot of water, you'll keep squirting bits of ink in it and it won't change because there's so much water that so make sure that if you want to get something that's really, you know, like your darker value, you might just put less water in there to start with. But let's see.
Paper should we use, by the way?
Well, you have to use the 18 by 24 drawing paper.
So not the newsprint.
No, it'll destroy it in a second.
Okay, thank you.
If you put water on the newsprint, you'll be very unhappy. It'll probably make your drawing paper wrinkle a little bit as it is, but it's thick and durable. But this cannot be done on the newsprint. So let's see. There's a little value. A shade of gray. There's another. Pretty close together. Some time just messing around like this. is fine. I might end up using my lids. I might put a small quantity of ink into my lids because I can put a really, that's a good way to get a nice dark one, is just a little bit of water poured into the lid. Here's me with my brush trying to find, some different values. So you can make at least, you can make 3. You got 3 jars. If it seems like it's getting overwhelming making more, then don't make more, because you definitely could do this well with 3. But if you got 4 or 5, that's fine too. But for example, this here, I must have had just a little ink into my water. It's really light gray. It's just stained water. And then this is like a middle gray. These are some I did before class when I was messing around. If I had this, and I had this, and then I had, say, that one, 1, 2, 3, that would be a pretty good spread. And then maybe I could add one darker still later on if I wanted to. Right now, I feel like a lot of my values are pretty close together in my jars. So I'm going to take my little bottle of Higgins, and I'm going to pick one of my jars. I'm going to squeeze my dropper, and I'm going to squeeze out some more ink into one of these jars to try to make it a darker value. But it's okay if that's happening, if everything seems like kind of light and you don't, you're having trouble making that's good. Whenever somebody jumps to like super, like it looks like they jumped to ink out of the, not diluted out of the jar, like it came out of this bottle and it's just like max, that always looks bad. Okay, so take the time and with different ratios of water to ink, try to specifically create a set of 3 that you can dip your brush in. Paper towel is a good thing to have handy, obviously. And know that you're entering into something. Put my paper towel here so I can blot my brush on it, because my brush is sure to get saturated with water sometimes when I don't want it to be. And I'll show you some of the stuff that I've been doing and explain what I want you to do. Okay, so you will, with dry media, you'll extract a few, a la the stencil, you'll extract a few really good shapes for your blurry artists, and you'll add them, and you'll observe like what just a few keenly observed shapes do to a portrait, just a few, and hopefully not create any ideas of facial features. Now here, it's another thing. It's like, what's more frightening than this kind of stuff? Well, these Rubenses are crazy complicated, like, so my brain, my bad side of the brain, it's not all bad. It helps me to pay bills. It helps me, I've used it all day, every day, language, and, need it to function, right? But it bullies my other side of the brain, the poor right side of the brain that isn't as connected. Of course, for me, I actually did turn it into, making a living, but for most people, but the fact that the immediately transferable to job stuff is on one side of the brain, you know what I mean, is the explanation why there's great atrophy of some things and much more development of others. But that side of the brain is going to look at the Rubens and go, holy shit, look at all that. I can't do that. That's ridiculous. This is a small reproduction of a very large painting that was made with a large team of people and so much going on and all that. But come back with your other side of your head and say, but wait, I don't have to do all those little itsy bitsy things. As a matter of fact, right now I'm looking at it and I'm enjoying the fact that through this lens, this camera, it's blurry. And a lot of that stuff, I can't see it. And I've been learning in drawing class that if I just sort of, do this or do that, I would still see all of these major things. And I've learned in drawing class to look at big stuff first and then go down to small. Maybe I don't need some of the small stuff at all necessarily, but hey, wait a minute. Maybe I'll just squint myself at it so it's not, so I don't go to all those little bitty things like that's a hand. Basically what I'm saying is I learned not to look at these things like it's TV, like I'm watching TV. Okay, and you've heard me make all these jokes about, well, when you see a certain shape and it's red, apply the brakes and stop. I am not telling you to examine the form of that sign. You just Pavlovian. That means stop your car here at this intersection so people don't get hurt. Not a time to think about, but the fact that we go through everything, hey, there's Mullins over there and he's got greasy black hair and he's got, these kind of things that you do, none of those would help you to draw me, right? All those associations and all those kind of things. What will help you to draw me is to be able to see form. And this is largely about abstraction. Okay. So if I'm looking at something like this, and I'm not saying that Rubens was setting out to make an abstraction, but with an incredible sense of design, which I do think this maker of allegorical narrative, yada, yada, in 16, whatever, that wasn't happening by accident. These kind of movements and, the way shapes are arranged and all this kind of, the fact that they happen to be angels and they happen to be mythical figures and they happen to be, Bacchus or whatever. Forget about all that right now and study this like you would a Rorschach inkblot test, say, or something like that. So I have this one and I gave it one pass. Where did that go? No, you're here somewhere. Just one pass. So you can see the ink. Now if I'm going to be impatient and unrealistic with myself and demand that I have this completely finished right this minute, I'm not going to like what I did because, hey, where's the flowing robes and where's the, but I'm not trying to make flowing robes. I'm trying to do analysis of shapes and values. So we get oops, stuff like that will happen, by the way. Don't let it bother you. We get a value darker than I had and give this another pass. So the way you want to do this is you want to take your 18 by 24 paper and make quarter sheets. I hope everybody's listening. Like fold it and fold it again. And you can just tear like quarter sheets, like divide a page into four. That's what I did here. If you fold it nicely and you run, push a lot when you crease it and you run your fingernail along it, it will tear nicely. Okay, and you can just tear it. You can cut it if you must. That's fine too. But with 4 quarter sheets and select one of these things to look at. Now, first, you're going to look at it and it's going to be like you're watching TV. You're like, this dramatic event is happening and that makes me think about religion, or this makes me think about Western art and colonialism, and this has to all be burned down and We got to start over. Like, you know, there's all these kinds of things like that can be going on and that will not help me to do this. I must not try to contour things. Instead, dodging and staying away from the really light areas, like if it's light, you're going to have to stay away from it. So your negative space experience will be useful when you go to do this. Everything's a shape. Where does it need to be darker? And of course, if you've only made one pass, that's going to be most of the places. But as this goes on and you add, you'll have fewer and fewer things to keep driving. And you can be really loose about this. Nothing has to be perfect. It doesn't mean don't concentrate. Do concentrate, do your best, but don't try to make perfect shapes as much as get the values in the right places. To try to get the shapes perfect is better done like what I was just showing you with the portrait. I mean, just relax and tell yourself, well, I'll be putting some small shapes of the darker values onto this later. So this, I don't have to get everything perfect right now. I'll just do my best to examine this in an abstract fashion. And I already committed one sin, which is like I was really pulled to this arm here, you know, and I just really, that actually is not that important. That was more me about like, ooh, arm, less my eye and more thinking about an arm. So I see that. These will look blotchy, they'll look blobby. And what I've got to do now, and you, by the way, you can take much more time doing it than that. You don't have to go at that pace. You can go much slower if you need to look longer, by all means. Because as I said before, rushing is probably rushing through things is probably one of the biggest. You know, so I made one pass. This one's stronger, and no surprise, I did it. That wasn't the first one I did. I was getting a little more warmed up. But can you see the kind of impression? Like, see how I kind of left. You see, it's not because it's a figure, it's because they're light. I didn't get everything or whatever, but you can, if you squint, you can kind of see how where this came from, and more, I think, than the previous one. So with a step darker, with value number 2, you know, then I can hit this again. You'll have to work on several of these at once. You got to let stuff sit and dry anyway. So if you get really impatient, you're apt to do who knows what. Now, diluted ink is diluted ink. Don't ask it to be a marker. Don't ask it to be a pencil. Don't ask it to be something else. But also, you know, while you're letting yourself be okay with the medium, because it's ink, right? It's going to bleed. It's going to, you know, do what wet media does. If you keep getting more and more water in your brush all the time and you never blot it, you may saturate your surface so much that you're just always just getting bleeds and you're not creating any variations. Okay. So be mindful of that, because sometimes the thing you want to do is this, you know, like you need to do that because there's so much water in play. I'm not saying you have to dry brush so much, which would be probably the more control. The control freak's way would probably be to dry brush this, would be like to not ever let it be as wet as I'm letting it be now. But I would say, well, if you gotta do something like that, save it till the end when the shapes are small. But the changes in values have to be there. And you can't just cover up everything you did last time with what you're doing this time. That won't work either. So you have to really look at like what it is and where it goes, right? And give it a going over and then put it aside, and don't get too caught up in little stuff. If you're in doubt, squint, right? I'll show you one that's like further down the line. Weeks ago, a month ago, I don't know when it was, I had this Rubens. It might have been might have been the same, you know, same week that I did basically, I basically did this in pencil, but so this one's got a lot of stuff going on. It actually makes it easier. We think that, oh no, I'm staying away from that one because it's so complicated, but that it may actually make it. Don't assume, you know, that, you know which one to avoid and which one to pick. By the way, I put one in there though for you. In that batch of Baroque, busy, crazy, multi-figure paintings, there's one, it's St. George slaying the dragon, and it's very small. And this actually will have the effect, because if you make it big enough if you enlarge it big enough to where you can see what you're doing, everything's blurred. And so it's actually like, it's like getting one that, because of the image size being small, the file size, it's like getting one that, like, you know, sort of pre-squinted for you to look at. So what I can do is go back through this one now that had a bunch of stuff in it already. And what I've got to watch is I've got to watch that my sort of lazy self doesn't fall into a trance and cover up stuff that I shouldn't cover up with my darker value. This can be really relaxing. It's like painting, even if you're just painting with ink and you don't have color. There's something about moving wet media and a brush around. It can be very hypnotizing and this is why people like it. Very like relaxing, but I have to pay attention to what I'm doing. The key is to pay attention enough to do the right things and then get the pleasure out, you know, that I was just describing, which is feeling this glide around, you know, and, you know, but not just arbitrarily placing, you know, a new set of darker things, right? So this one just got hit another lick, and I'll set it aside, and you'll find out that gravity is not your best pal in this. If you lay these things down and it's not totally flat, you may see that the ink is pooling in certain places, or it's up to something like that. Don't let that bother you too much. But if you got all four of these going, you know, then you can just move one aside and get one that has dried. Find a next step value. Drip ink all over the damn place. And, you know, add another step. It's like, where would it make sense for me to keep going? And where do I need to what shapes just need to be avoided now? And sometimes it'll be like your lightest lights, you'll actually avoid from the beginning, and you'll avoid through this entire process probably. But if you start off, as I'm advocating, with a really light gray, just stained water, and you get something somewhere that you don't want it later, it won't be that big a deal. It won't hurt you that much. The problem is when you make a massive jump in value, you know, and then do something that you shouldn't have done. That's when you make some huge leap. So try to create some values that are light, not quite as light, darker still, you know, and place them and make a real effort and it will take an effort, to not think about stuff, to not be like, I am doing the drapery now and it better look like drapery, or this is now a guy with a beard. And you know, now if your eye gets trained enough and you do this well enough, you can have those kinds of thoughts without it not necessarily being destructive. But you've heard me talk about how when we cartoon, that's kind of the process we engage in, is we just think about that. We think and then we put down something that stands for something. And this is not that at all. This is an observation of light and dark. And of course, we're not allowing ourselves to get the shapes perfect, which is a luxury, by the way. So this got another pass. And take your time. Many of you will probably want to go slower than I'm going. When I demonstrate, I generally get a little rushed. I always hate things that I do when I'm doing demonstration, because I usually feel that I have to be speedier. This might be one of those times where, but you know, I'm not going to ask you to do it. Like, hey, show me what you're doing. I'm not going to ask you to do it because I don't want you to hold something up and then have your ink run down your paper. Okay, so you're in luck. I'm not going to ask to see the work in progress. But the other thing that's probably, among all the other things that are good about what you're doing here, is the fact that you're working on several things at once. That's very, very good for you. So set one aside, pick up another one that's more or less dried meantime. Look for where the darks can be driven. You'll see every time you do this, the workload just shrinks in size, or there's an opportunity because of something that you had there before. Where do values need to be driven darker? Don't worry about anything looking perfect. Let your gauge be, you know, a good squint. And if lights and darks first and foremost are matching, then you can worry about approximate shapes. They can only be approximate anyway. So, you know, do not think you have to render an arm or something like that, because then you wouldn't be doing what I'm asking you to do. Okay, but you might remember that thing that I say sometimes, which is, what is a detail but a very small shape anyway? Okay, and you'll have some very pleasant surprises, I think, if what you do with your values is based on your observation. You know, I think you might find that if you're not sure, look at it from far away. You know, take your source in your hand or have your thing on your screen, but look at it from a distance. You can't objectively deal with what you're doing or see what you're doing from super close up. Okay.